In the forbidden legends of the Great Freeze, mercy was a death sentence. Kale's tribe knew only the unbreakable law of the ice: kill before you are hunted. But on the night the storm blinded the world, that law was broken. From the white abyss she emerged, a saber-toothed titan, a mountain of primal muscle and ancient fury, capable of slaughtering the entire pack in seconds. The spears went up immediately. Kale, the hunt leader, drew his bow, waiting for the attack that would tear men apart. But the slaughter never came. The beast did the impossible. Trembling against her own instinct, she did not roar. She laid down in the snow. Slowly, the giant rolled her massive body and exposed her throat to the human weapons, the ultimate sign of surrender. An alpha predator never bows unless she faces a terror greater than death itself. In the beast's amber eyes, Kale found not the hatred of a monster, but the silent desperation of a mother. And then the sound cut through the howling wind, a faint cry coming from the black waters of the river flowing into darkness. That animal was not asking for mercy for herself. She was begging for a forbidden alliance to save what was left of her soul. The wind did not just blow, it screamed. It was a living thing, a restless spirit tearing through the valley of the Clovis people, carrying with it the scent of ice and old death. In the era of the Great Freeze, silence was a luxury, and darkness was a weapon wielded by the night. Kale stood at the edge of the firelight, his boots sinking into the knee-deep snow. He was the spearhead of his tribe, the one who stood between the sleeping children and the abyss, his breath plumed in the air, freezing instantly against his beard. The cold here was not merely a temperature, it was a physical weight, pressing down on his shoulders, trying to crush the warmth out of his blood. He gripped his spear until his knuckles turned white. Something was out there. It wasn't a sound that alerted him. The storm was too loud for that. It was a feeling, a vibration in the ground that traveled up through the soles of his feet. The ancient rhythm of something heavy, something colossal, moving with a purpose that defied the storm. Kale signaled to the others. He didn't speak. In the frozen lands, words were wasted breath. A sharp whistle cut through the gale, and instantly 6 warriors emerged from the firs. Weapons raised, eyes wide with the adrenaline of the hunted. Then the white curtain of the blizzard parted. She emerged like a nightmare, taking physical form. A saber-toothed titan, she was massive. A mountain of tawny fur and rippling muscle that seemed to block out the little light the moon offered. Her paws were the size of boulders, designed to crush skulls. And from her upper jaw descended to daggers of ivory, long and curved, stained with the memory of 1,000 kills.
If you feel a calling to the brutal world of the Ice Age and are fascinated by the majestic beasts that once walked among us, this is your place. Subscribe now and join our tribe around the fire to ensure the legends of these extinct giants are never forgotten.
Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in Kale's chest. This was an apex, a queen of the frozen wastes. A beast like this did not wander into a human camp unless it intended to slaughter everyone. Fire, Kale shouted, his voice cracking against the wind. The warriors drew their bows, flint tips aimed at the monster's chest. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and fear. They waited for the roar. They waited for the muscles to bunch up, for the pounce that would turn the snow red. Every instinct in Kale's body screamed at him to release the arrow, to strike before the monster could move. But the monster did not attack. The titan stopped 10 paces from the spear wall. She looked at the fire, then at the men. Her breathing was ragged, heavy heaves that rattled deep in her chest. She wasn't crouching to spring, she was swaying. Then she did the impossible. Slowly, agonizingly, the great cat lowered her front quarters. The snow crunched under her massive weight. She didn't snarl, she didn't hiss. She rolled onto her side, exposing her soft, pale underbelly to the night sky. She tilted her head back, exposing the most vulnerable point of her body, her throat. The silence that followed was louder than the storm. The warriors froze, confusion warring with their training. A predator of this magnitude never surrendered. In the law of the wild, to expose the throat was to invite death. It was a gesture of total, absolute submission. "It's a trap," whispered Vark, a scar-faced hunter to Kale's left, his bowstring drawn so tight it hummed. "She wants to lure us in. Kill her now, Kale. Think of the meat. Think of the winter." Kale hesitated. His finger hovered over the release. He looked into the beast's eyes. They were amber pools of ancient intelligence, but the fire within them was dim. He didn't see the killer that haunted their nightmares. He saw something else. He saw the same look he had seen in his wife's eyes when the fever took their firstborn. He saw grief. He saw a desperation so profound it had broken the barrier between species. "Hold," Kale commanded. "She will kill us all," Vark hissed, stepping forward. "I said hold." Kale turned, snapping the order with the authority of the alpha. He lowered his bow just an inch. The tiger let out a sound that was not a roar, but a low, vibrating Mona sound of agony that seemed to come from the earth itself. She looked at Kale, locking eyes with him. In that second, the wind seemed to die down. It was a moment of connection, a forbidden bridge built over the abyss of fear. She wasn't asking for mercy for herself. The arch of her neck, the tremble in her paws, she was begging. Slowly, the Titan rolled back onto her feet. The movement was labored. She was exhausted, her ribs showing faintly through the thick winter coat. She didn't look at the other warriors. She looked only at Kale. She turned her massive head toward the darkness of the forest, then looked back at him. Then she took a step toward the trees. She paused, looking back again. It was a gesture as clear as speech. "Follow me. She is leading us into an ambush," Vark spat, lowering his spear, but keeping his grip tight. "The pack is waiting in the dark." Kale watched the beast. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Logic told him Vark was right. Logic told him to put an arrow in the beast's flank and feed the tribe for a month. But the soul of the hunter, the instinct that lived deeper than logic, told him this was different. The tiger wind again, a high-pitched broken sound that didn't belong in the throat of a monster. She took another step, her tail low, her body language screaming urgency. "Stay here," Kale said, his voice low. "You go to your death," the shaman muttered from the back, stepping into the light. "Or you go to meet a destiny the spirits have woven." Kale didn't answer. He stepped away from the safety of the fire. The cold hit him instantly, biting through his furs, but he didn't stop. He stepped into the darkness, following the tracks of the monster. The tiger waited for him to catch up, keeping a distance, but leading him away from the camp, down toward the valley floor where the river roared beneath the ice. The tribe watched in silence as their leader vanished into the white void, trailing the shadow of death. Kale didn't know if he was walking toward a trap or a revelation. He only knew that the look in the beast's eyes had pierced him, and for the first time in his life, he feared the question more than the bite. The darkness beyond the firelight was not empty, it was heavy. Kale moved through the blizzard, his boots breaking the crust of the snow with a sound like snapping bones. Ahead of him, the massive silhouette of the Sabertooth Titan moved with a strange, uneven rhythm. She was a ghost in the gale, a creature of ivory and shadow that should have been hunting him. Yet here she was, carving a path through the drifts for him to follow. The cold was a physical assault. It gnawed at Kale's exposed skin, seeking the heat of his blood with the patience of a predator. Every breath was a battle, the air so frigid it felt like inhaling crushed glass. He kept his spear raised, the tip trembling slightly not from fear, but from the shivering that started in his marrow. His logical mind, the voice of the hunter, screamed that this was madness. He was walking away from his tribe, away from the warmth, trailing a monster into the heart of the great white death. But his gut told him otherwise. He watched the beast. She was limping. The Titan, usually a picture of fluid, lethal grace, stumbled every few yards. Her head hung low, swaying with exhaustion. Kale narrowed his eyes, fighting the stinging wind to see better. She wasn't injured by a spear or a trap. She was exhausted by grief. He recognized that walk. It was the trudge of a parent who has run past the limits of their body because their soul refuses to give up. Memories flashed in Kale's mind, flashes of a fever that had gripped his own son 2 winters ago. He remembered carrying the boy through a storm just like this, seeking the shaman in the high caves. He remembered the burning in his lungs, the way his legs had turned to stone, and yet he had kept moving. Why? Because the life in his arms was more important than the life in his chest. He looked at the tiger again. She is not leading me to a kill, Kale realized, the thought landing with the weight of a stone. She is leading me to a rescue. The realization shifted the world on its axis. The monster was gone. In her place was a desperate mother. The fear in Kale's chest began to cool, replaced by a strange, solemn curiosity. He quickened his pace, stepping into the deep footprints she left behind, using her massive body as a shield against the biting wind. They walked for what felt like hours, though time had no meaning in the white void. The terrain began to slope downward. The roar of the wind changed pitch, mixing with a deeper, more thunderous sound, the crashing of water. They had reached the river of shadows. It was a scar on the face of the valley, a violent torrent of black water that refused to freeze completely due to its speed. Giant slabs of ice, sharp as obsidian, clashed and ground against each other in the current, creating a cacophony of destruction. To fall in was not just to drown, it was to be crushed. The Titan stopped at the edge of the steep bank, her ears flattened against her skull. She let out a sound that tore at Kale's spirit, a keen, high-pitched whine that cut through the thunder of the river. Kale moved up beside her, keeping a respectful distance, his spear now used as a walking stick. He looked where she was looking. There, in the middle of the churning black nightmare, was a small island of ice, and clinging to it, wet and shivering violently, was a cub. It was small, no bigger than a human toddler, its fur matted with ice. It was mewing, a tiny sound lost in the roar of the water. The ice floe it was trapped on was caught in a temporary eddy, spinning slowly, but the main current was eating away at the edges. It was only a matter of time before the ice shattered or flipped, sending the cub into the freezing abyss. The mother paced frantically on the bank. She dipped a massive paw into the water, and then retracted it as the ice beneath her weight groaned and cracked ominously. This was the tragedy of the Titan. She was built for dominance, She had claws that could disembowel a mammoth and teeth that could puncture a skull. But here, against the fragility of the ice, her power was her curse. She was too heavy. If she leaped, the impact would shatter the very raft her child clung to. If she tried to swim, the current would smash her mass against the rocks. She was the strongest creature in the valley, and she was completely helpless. Cale stood frozen, witnessing the cruel irony of nature. The beast was paralyzed by physics. The mother looked back at him, her eyes wide, the amber fire dampened by tears. She chuffed at him, a soft, pleading sound. She looked at the cub, then back at Cale, then down at Cale's boots. The message hit him like a physical blow. You are small. You are weak. You are light. She didn't need a warrior. She didn't need a slayer. She needed a creature that could walk where she could not. She needed a human. Cale looked at the river. The water was death. The ice bridges leading toward the center were thin, treacherous webs of frozen slush. One wrong step would mean hypothermia in seconds, followed by the crushing weight of the river. You ask much, mother, Cale whispered, the wind stealing his words. He looked at the cub again. The little creature had stopped crying and was just shaking, its eyes closing. The sleep of the snow was coming, the final sleep. Cale thought of Vark and the others back at the camp. They would call him a fool. They would say this was a violation of the natural order. Humans do not save monsters. Humans survive them. To save this cub was to ensure a future predator survived to hunt his own grandchildren. But then he looked at the mother. She had lowered herself to her belly again, watching the water with an intensity that broke his heart. She was vibrating with the urge to jump, to die trying, but she held back for the sake of the cub. It wasn't about the future. It wasn't about the species. It was about this moment. It was about the sacred, primal bond that said, protect the bloodline. Cale stabbed his spear into the snowbank, leaving it behind. He reached for the coil of rawhide rope at his belt. His hands were numb, his fingers stiff, but he forced them to work. He tested the ice at the edge of the bank with his boot. It held. The tiger watched him. She stopped pacing. She went perfectly still, her gaze locking onto him with a terrifying intensity. She understood. Cale stepped onto the ice. It groaned under him, a sickening sound, but it did not break. He was light enough, just barely. If I die, Cale muttered to the wind, stepping out over the black water, my ancestors will never let me hear the end of it. The wind howled, but in his mind there was only silence and the beat of his own heart. The journey across the path of glass had begun.
The night is dark, and the modern world outside is cold. But here, the light of our story unites us. From what corner of the planet are you listening to this ancient legend? Comment below, and tell us where your tribe is gathered around the fire tonight.
The world narrowed down to the sound of Cale's own heartbeat and the terrifying crack of the ice beneath his boots. He was walking on a shattered mirror, suspended over a void. The river of shadows didn't just flow. It raged beneath the thin crust, a torrent of black water, so cold it could stop a human heart in seconds. Every step was a gamble. Cale moved with the exaggerated slowness of a stalking hunter, his knees bent, his weight distributed wide. He was not hunting flesh now. He was hunting balance. To his left, the bank seemed miles away. To his right, the open water churned, tossing jagged shards of ice like driftwood. And ahead, spinning slowly in a dark eddy, was the flake of ice holding the cub. Cale paused. The ice settled with a groan that vibrated up his shins. He dared not breathe. The wind whipped his hair across his face, stinging his eyes, but he couldn't blink. He felt exposed, naked, without his spear, a soft creature intruding on the domain of the winter spirits. He glanced back. On the snowy bank, the Sabertooth Titan had turned into a statue carved from anxiety and muscle. She hadn't moved. She lay flat on her belly, her massive paws extended over the edge of the bank, her claws dug into the frozen mud to keep herself from sliding in. Her amber eyes were locked onto him. She wasn't blinking either. For a moment, Cale felt the absurdity of it. A week ago, he would have given his best furs for a chance to kill this beast. Now, her gaze felt like a physical tether holding him steady. There was no malice in her stare, only a suspended terror. She was trusting him with the only thing that mattered more than her own survival, her bloodline. Cale turned back to the task. 10 paces, just 10 paces of treacherous, shifting slush. He took a step. Water seeped over the top of his boot, biting his skin with teeth of frost. The cub saw him coming. The small creature, no bigger than a bobcat, but already bearing the oversized paws of its lineage, hissed. It arched its back, tiny ears flattened. Even facing death, it had the spirit of a king. It bared its teeth-milk fangs that were already sharp enough to draw blood. "Easy, little warrior," Cale whispered, the words lost in the gale. "I am not the cold." The eddy shifted. The current surged, slamming a chunk of debris against the cub's ice raft. The impact was violent. The raft tilted. The cub scrambled, claws scrabbling uselessly against the slick surface, sliding toward the black water. Cale didn't think. Instinct took the reins. He lunged. He threw his weight forward, abandoning caution. The ice beneath him shattered into 1,000 diamonds. He fell, his chest hitting the edge of the cub's raft. The air punched from his lungs. His legs dangled in the water. The cold was instantaneous, a shock so profound it felt like burning fire. It grabbed his legs, heavy and paralytic. He scrambled, clawing at the slush, hauling his torso up onto the precarious island. The raft dipped dangerously under his added weight. Water washed over them. The cub struck. Terrified, the little beast bit Cale's forearm. The teeth sank through the fur bracer and into the skin. Cale gritted his teeth, swallowing a scream. He didn't pull away. Pulling would tear the flesh. He accepted the pain. It was the price of the pact. "I've got you," Cale grunted, ignoring the blood running down his wrist. With his free hand, he grabbed the scruff of the cub's neck the way a mother would. The cub went rigid, instinctively curling its tail. Cale hauled the animal against his chest, wrapping his fur cloak around the wet, shivering body. The heat of the human body met the chill of the animal. Now came the hardest part, the return. Cale looked back at the bank. The gap he had jumped was now open water. The ice he had walked on was gone, consumed by the river. He was stranded on a shrinking island in the middle of the torrent, with a predator's child in his arms and his legs numb from the freezing soak. The mother let out a roar, not of anger, but of panic. She stood up, pacing frantically at the edge, her muscles coiling. She looked ready to jump, to join them in the watery grave. "No," Cale shouted, raising a hand. "Stay." He looked around. The current was dragging the raft downstream toward a cluster of rocks that would shatter it completely. He had to move. To his left, a fallen pine tree jutted out from the bank, its branches coated in ice, hovering just a few feet above the water. It was their only chance. But to reach it, he would have to stand up on the spinning raft and leap. With a 30-pound cub in his arms, On legs he could barely feel. Cale struggled to his feet. The raft wobbled. The world spun. He locked eyes with the branch. He thought of his own son waiting by the fire. He thought of the empty space in his tent if he didn't return. Fear is the mind killer, the elders used to say. Action is life. He coiled his muscles. The raft struck a submerged rock and pitched forward. Cale used the momentum. He launched himself into the air. For a second, he was flying a wingless bird, suspended between the water and the wood. He hit the tree. The impact was brutal. The rough bark scraped his face. His free arm wrapped around the branch. His muscles screaming as they took the full weight of his body and the cub. He dangled there, feet kicking in the empty air, the river roaring hungrily below him. He slipped. The ice on the branch was treacherous. His grip faltered. A shadow moved above him. The tree shook. Something massive had stepped onto the trunk from the bank. The wood groaned under a titanic weight. Cale looked up, gasping for air. The mother was there. She had crawled out onto the trunk. She reached down, her jaws opening wide. For a split second, Cale thought this was the end. She would take the cub and drop him. But she didn't aim for the cub. She clamped her jaws gently around the fabric of Cale's shoulder furs. With a strength that defied logic, she hauled him up as if he were nothing more than a lost kitten. Cale scrambled over the bark, collapsing onto the snowy bank, gasping, freezing, alive. He curled around the cub, shielding it from the wind. He looked up. The Titan stood over him, her breath steaming in the night air. She wasn't looking at the cub. She was looking at him. The barrier was broken. The debt was struck. But as Cale tried to catch his breath, a scent hit him, a scent that wasn't ice or tiger. It was the musk of old rot and dirty fur. A twig snapped in the forest behind them. The mother tiger spun around, her hackles rising, a low, demonic growl rumbling in her chest. Cale looked past her flank and saw the nightmare emerging from the trees. The rescue was over. The war had just begun. The silence that followed the rescue was shattered, not by a sound, but by a smell. It hit Cale like a physical wave, the stench of carrion, wet dog, and old blood. The cub in his arms went rigid, burying its face into Cale's furs, trembling so violently it shook Cale's own chest. Cale looked up, past the heaving flank of the mother tiger. Emerging from the tree line was a horror that belonged to the darkest nightmares of his ancestors. It was a short-faced bear, but to call it a bear was to insult the gods of the forest. This was a walking hill of matted fur and muscle, standing nearly 6 feet at the shoulder on all fours. Its legs were disproportionately long, built not for lumbering, but for running down horses. Its muzzle was short, brutal, and designed for crushing bone. It didn't look at the tiger. Its small, pig-like eyes were fixed on Calor, rather, on the bundle of warmth in Calais' arms. The beast rose onto its hind legs. It blocked out the moon. It stood 12 feet tall, a tower of gluttony and death. It let out a roar that wasn't just noise. It was a pressure wave that vibrated in Cale's teeth and bowels. Cale scrambled backward, his boots slipping in the mud and snow. He had no spear. He had no shield. He was holding a baby animal that smelled like a snack. He was dead. The bear dropped to all fours and charged. The ground shook. It moved with terrifying speed, an avalanche of flesh hurtling toward them. But the avalanche hit a wall of ivory and rage. The mother tiger didn't wait. She didn't calculate the odds. Despite her exhaustion, despite the freezing swim, she launched herself. She was smaller than the bear, half its weight, but she was a Sabertooth, She was built for precision violence. They collided with the sound of a falling tree, a wet, meaty thud that echoed through the valley. The impact sent them both rolling into the snow. It was a blur of teeth and claws. The tiger went for the throat, her dual daggers seeking the jugular, but the bear's loose skin and thick fur acted like armor. The bear roared, thrashing, using its superior strength to throw her off. Cale scrambled toward the tree line, clutching the cub. His mind screamed, but his legs were heavy with cold. He slipped, falling to his knees. The fight spilled toward him. The bear swatted the tiger aside with a blow that would have decapitated a bison. The cat hit the ground hard, skidding through the snow, gasping for air. The path to Cale was open. The bear turned its massive head toward the human. It didn't care about the fight. It wanted the meal. It lunged, closing the distance in 2 strides. Cale curled around the cub, turning his back to the monster, waiting for the crushing weight of the jaws. He closed his eyes, whispering a prayer to the spirits of the wind. Wham! The blow didn't land on Cale. He heard a snarl of pure defiance and felt a heavy weight slam into the snow, inches from his spine. He looked over his shoulder. The mother had returned. She had thrown herself between the bear and the man. She had taken the swipe meant for Cale's spine. Her flank was torn open, 3 deep, parallel gashes, pouring blood onto the white snow, steaming in the cold air. She screamed a sound of pain mixed with fury, but she didn't retreat. She stood over Cale and her cub, her legs trembling, blood dripping from her side. She bared her sabers, snapping her jaws, creating a barrier of death between the monster and the helpless. The bear hesitated. Predators calculate risk versus reward. It wanted a snack, not a fight to the death. The tiger was wounded, yes, but she was now fighting with the desperation of a mother cornered. There is no force in nature more dangerous than a mother protecting her young. The tiger lunged again, not to kill, but to maim. She clamped her jaws onto the bear's sensitive nose, driving her incisors deep. The bear shrieked, thrashing backward, pawing at its face. The pain was sharp, immediate, and blinding. Blood sprayed across the snow bear blood. The giant shook her off, but the will to fight was broken. The prize was too costly. The bear roared one last time, a sound of frustration, and backed away, shaking its head, blood flying from its snout. It turned and lumbered into the darkness, seeking easier prey that didn't fight back with knives attached to its face. Silence rushed back into the valley, heavier than before. The mother tiger stood watching the darkness where the bear had vanished. She held her ground for a long time, panting, her breath wheezing. Then her legs gave out. She collapsed into the snow with a heavy grunt. Cale slowly uncurled. He was alive. The cub was alive. He looked at the fallen titan. The snow beneath her was turning a dark, rich crimson. She lay on her side, her eyes half closed, her chest heaving with shallow, ragged breaths. He stood up, his legs shaking uncontrollably. He walked toward her. A smart hunter would run now. The beast was wounded, weak. He could finish her, take the pelt, take the cub, and become a legend in his tribe. But Cale didn't reach for his knife. He walked to her head. She opened one eye. It was glazed with pain, but the amber fire still flickered. She didn't growl. She let out a soft chuff, looking at the bundle in his arms. Cale knelt in the bloody snow. The cold was seeping into his bones, but he didn't feel it anymore. He felt only the immense weight of what had just happened. She had taken a blow meant for him. She had bled for him. The ancient war between man and beast had been suspended. In its place, something new had been forged, something raw, red, and unbreakable. The wind had died down, leaving behind a silence so absolute it felt heavy. The only sounds in the valley were the ragged breathing of the wounded Titan and the soft, rhythmic crunch of snow as Kale shifted his weight. He was kneeling in a pool of red slush. The heat of the battle was evaporating, replaced by the creeping numbness of the Ice Age night. His own blood, mixed with the river water and the sweat of fear, froze against his skin. But he didn't move. He couldn't. In front of him lay the Queen of the North. She was no longer the mountain of terror that had emerged from the blizzard. She was flesh and bone, trembling with shock. The gashes on her flanks, the price she had paid for his life, were deep, weeping dark blood onto the pristine white canvas of the world. Kale looked down at the bundle in his arms. The cub had stopped shivering. It was warm, dry inside his furs, and looking up at him with eyes that held the same amber starlight as its mother. It didn't bite him now. It knew, with that strange, silent wisdom of beasts, that the war was over. "Go to her," Kale whispered, his voice cracking. He slowly unwrapped his outer fur. The cold air hit the cub, and it squeaked a tiny, helpless sound. The mother's ear twitched. She opened her eyes. The haze of pain cleared for a second. She lifted her head, the effort visible in the straining muscles of her neck. Kale extended his arms. He didn't toss the cub. He leaned forward, placing the small creature gently into the curve of the mother's paws. It was a moment of supreme vulnerability. Kale's face was inches from jaws that could crush a bison's skull. If she snapped, he would be dead before he hit the ground. But she didn't snap. She lowered her nose, inhaling the scent of her offspring. She nudged the cub, checking for broken bones, licking the ice from its fur with frantic tenderness. A low, rumbling vibration started in her chestapur that sounded like distant thunder. Then the Titan turned her gaze back to Kale. Kale froze. The ancient instinct to flee spiked in his blood, but he held his ground. He held her gaze. This was the moment of judgment. The great cat shifted. She winced as pain shot through her side, but she dragged herself a few inches closer to the human. She stretched out her neck. Kale closed his eyes, expecting the bite. Instead, he felt something rough and warm rasp across his cheek. She licked him. It wasn't a grooming lick. It was a deliberate, solitary mark. She licked the blood from the scratch the tree bark had left on his face. It was rough as sandpaper, wet and hot. It was a baptism in the language of the wild, where words do not exist. She was claiming him. She was saying, "You are not prey. You are pack." Kale opened his eyes, tears freezing on his lashes. He reached out, his hand trembling, and for a fleeting second, he touched the bridge of her nose. The fur was coarse, the bone underneath, hard as granite. Kale. The shout broke the spell. The sound of crunching snow and heavy breathing announced the arrival of the others. Vark, the shaman, and the rest of the hunting party burst through the tree line, spears raised, arrows drawn. They saw the blood. They saw the beast lying prone. They saw their leader kneeling within striking distance. "She's down," Vark screamed, his eyes wide with the thrill of the kill. "Strike now in the eye." Vark drew his bowstring to his ear. The tiger snarled, trying to rise, but her legs failed her. She covered her cub with her chin, baring her fangs in a final, defiant grimace. She was too weak to fight them all. She was going to die. "Stop," Kale stood up. He didn't step away from the tiger. He stepped between her and the arrows. He spread his arms wide, making himself a shield for the monster. Kale, move, Vark yelled, confused. It's a free kill. Think of the glory. That pelt is worth a kingdom. There is no glory here. Kale's voice was low, but it carried the weight of iron. Only dead. He looked at his tribe. He looked at the shaman, whose eyes were wide with a dawning realization. She fought the short face, Kale said, pointing to the massive tracks and the bare blood in the snow. She took the blow meant for me. She saved the bloodline of the tribe by saving its leader. If you strike her, you strike me. The wind howled through the trees, emphasizing the standoff. Vark lowered his bow slightly, his face twisting in confusion. This went against every lesson of the Ice Age. Monsters were food, or they were death. They were never allies. She is a killer, Vark spat. She is a mother, Kale countered. And tonight, she has more honor than any man who would kill a wounded savior. The shaman stepped forward. He placed a hand on Vark's arrow. The spirits are watching, the old man whispered. Look at the snow. The blood of the man and the blood of the beast have mixed. To kill her now would be to curse us all. Slowly, reluctantly, the weapons were lowered. Kale turned back to the tiger. Go, he said, softly. The Titan seemed to understand that the window of mercy was closing. With a groan of effort that was painful to watch, she gathered her legs under her. She rose, swaying like a tree in a gale. Blood still dripped from her flank, red jewels in the moonlight. She picked up her cub by the scruff of the neck. The little one went limp. She took 3 steps toward the deep forest, then paused. She looked back one last time. She didn't look at Vark. She didn't look at the shaman. She looked at Kale. There was no softness in her eyes. Nature is not soft, but there was respect, acknowledgement. Then she limped into the shadows and vanished, swallowed by the white void. Years later, when the fires burned low and the winter winds rattled the skins of the tents, Kale would tell the story. He would show the scar on his arm where the cub had bitten him, and the faint white line on his cheek where the mother had washed him. The tribe never hunted in that valley again. It became sacred ground, a place where the line between man and beast had blurred. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the wolves were silent and the moon was full, the sentries would report seeing a massive shadow watching the camp from the ridge. A Titan, old and scarred, sitting like a guardian made of stone. They said she never attacked. She simply watched over the tribe that had given her back her future. In the brutal, unforgiving world of the Great Freeze, they had learned the most dangerous truth of all, that even in the heart of a monster, there beats a soul capable of gratitude, and that loyalty, once earned, is the only fire that never burns out.
The embers now fade, and the cold wind of reality returns. Did this ancient legend about the unlikely pact between man and beast touch your heart? Share your emotions in the comments below. The tribe wants to hear your voice. Keeping this digital campfire lit and conjuring these forgotten worlds through our imagination requires great effort. If you value this journey of escapism and want to ensure the flame of these legends never dies out, I ask you, subscribe to the channel now. Your presence in our tribe is the strength that allows me to continue forging the next great story.